Right, hello class, thank you so much for joining me, and congratulations on making it to our last lecture video for Unit 1. So what we're going to try to do today is to take the tools we've been building for understanding consumer decisions, decisions like how much of your money you should spend on food versus housing, right, or Lunchables versus beefaroni, and using them to try to understand people's decisions about work, particularly the decision about how much of your time to spend working versus doing other things. Now, the reason that we can use the same tools for understanding labor supply decisions as we would for trying to understand consumer decisions is because fundamentally, these are the same types of choices. We have a set of feasible options, right, combinations of income and time spent working that we're able to consume, right, that we're able to choose, and we have preferences, right? We care about having time away from work, we care about being able to buy things, and we're ultimately going to try to do the job of figuring out what your optimal choices look like given your preferences and given your constraints. Now, the reason that this is a useful and important thing to do is because people's decisions about how much to work and how to work are some of the most consequential decisions that we make. They're important for understanding social trends, right? Like understanding why the gender wage gap declined from the 1950s to the 1980s, but hasn't declined very much since. Or for understanding the roots of rising inequality for the last 40 years. They're also important for understanding policy questions, like how to design tax systems to raise as much revenue as possible while providing as little disincentive for work as possible. Or how to design welfare systems with similar goals, to transfer money effectively to low-income households that need it without distorting their choices more than we have to. So if we're able to understand how people make their decisions about work, we'll be able to understand both why technological or societal changes influence labor markets, and also how policy choices affect those decisions. Finally, this is going to be useful and important for us as individuals. As I said before, some of the most important decisions we're going to make are going to be decisions about how to spend our time, and in particular, how to use our working life, right? How to structure our career. And so being able to take a step back and think about these problems in a rational way and in a more careful and scientific way might help give us insights into how we want to spend our own time and make our own career decisions. Okay, cool. So that's what we're doing today and why we're trying to do it. Okay, so if we want to be able to do that, if we want to be able to think about our decision to supply labor as a consumer theory problem, the first thing we need to do is identify the core trade-off that governs our decision about how much labor to supply. So in a standard consumer theory problem, right, we've got two goods, let's say Lunchables and beefaroni, and what we do is we say, given our income, we can afford various combinations of Lunchables and beefaroni, we pick whichever one's best, right? And the core trade-off is the more Lunchables we get, the less beefaroni we can get. So what's the core trade-off when we think about our decision to supply labor? To think about that, let's imagine that you have a job where you can work as many or as few hours as you want, and you get, let's say, $15 an hour for as many hours you want to work. As many hours as you like. Right, so you can work 24 hours a day if you want, or you could work no hours a day. So the first thing to think about is, if this is our option, right, if we have this ability to work as much as we want, why wouldn't we work 24 hours a day every day for the rest of our lives? The reason's fairly obvious, right? That would be terrible, right? We would hate it. We wouldn't have any time to sleep. We wouldn't have any way to spend our money, right? We would never go to the movies. We'd never talk to our friends. It would be a terrible, terrible life. So the reason is, fundamentally, we value our time. Right? We value time away from work, which I'll call leisure. Now, I want to be clear here. When I'm talking about leisure, right, when I'm talking about time away from work, I'm not just talking about things like watching a movie or talking to your friends or taking a walk in the park. I'm not just talking about fundamentally enjoyable activities. I'm also talking about things that you have to do for survival, right? So sleep might be included in leisure. And I'm talking about things that you might value because they're useful and important, or they provide you with important goods, even if they're not fun, right? So doing your taxes is leisure, cleaning your apartment is leisure, cooking food is leisure, right? So this is basically time spent outside of work, not working, sometimes excluding commuting, or something else that we are going to value explicitly, right? But it includes fun stuff, chores, sleep, basically anything that isn't work and that we're not discussing explicitly in some other part of our consumer decision model. Okay, right, so this is the reason that we're not going to work 24 hours a day, because we value our time, we value our leisure, right? There's things that we want to do with our time other than working. So then on the other side, right, why don't we spend 0 hours working, right? If we value our time so much, why would we ever trade any of our time for money? And again, right, the reason is we want to be able to buy stuff, right? We work so that we can afford a place to live, so we can afford food, so we can afford, concert tickets or whatever it is that we like, right? So we also value consumption. We value stuff that we can buy. Which I'm going to call consumption. Right, so included in consumption is going to be things like groceries, movie tickets, etc. It's also going to include things like paying for gas on your commute or something like this. Now, the reason that I say that we value consumption rather than, right, so this is stuff that costs money. The reason that I say that we value consumption rather than that we value money itself is because fundamentally what we actually care about is the stuff that we can buy with money, right? If I handed you a wheelbarrow full of, Weimar Republic German currency or Zimbabwean dollars or things that can't be traded for anything, you wouldn't care about it at all, right? We fundamentally don't want the money. We want the stuff that we can buy with the money. However, what we're going to do to simplify things is we're going to define something called C, right, called consumption, that essentially means a dollar's worth of stuff, right? So if I spend $1 on groceries, or I spend $1 on movie tickets, or I spend $1 on airlines or whatever, all of that is going to count as units of consumption. Cool. So at this point, right, we've basically said that we have preferences over two goods, right? Leisure, which is our time away from work, and consumption, which is the stuff that we can buy with our money, right? And that's going to allow us to talk about our decisions about how much to work as a trade-off between leisure and consumption. Now, one last thing I want to leave you with is that by doing this, right, by saying that we're going to make a trade-off between leisure and consumption, we're really pushing a lot of other decisions into the background, right? All the decisions we've talked about so far, are you going to spend your money on beefaroni or Lunchables? Are you going to go to the movies, or are you going to buy groceries? Are you going to get food or housing? All of those are somehow in the background when we talk about your preferences over consumption, right? We're going to assume that with the money you have or the money you make, you're going to make whatever decisions make you happiest. And likewise, with the time that you spend outside of work, right, we could talk about your preferences over watching a movie versus going for a walk. We're going to assume that you're making your best choices there as well. Cool.